The Discontented Ghost, Chapter 12. One might think after a triumph of such magnitude, I would have once again been my old sunny self, happy with my lot. And for a day or two I was. "Simon, your ears should be burning. You're the hero of the hour," Lady Eleanor reported, and they're still amazed at the way Mrs. Umney rallied round to do her bit. "I think it was most courageous of you, Mrs. Umney," the mistress said to me. And I said, "Well, ma'am, I am used to Sir Simon by now, and once you get used to him, he's not so bad. All the same, I've been given a nice rise in salary. And I a rise in their estimation. Yes, indeed, you'll have no more trouble from the Otis family. Not even from the twins. They have solemnly promised to turn over a new leaf. Of course, they weren't told everything, but they know you were responsible for getting rid of Cousin Henry. Wash even had his joke about that. We all helped, he said, but Sir Simon was the moving spirit. Oh, and another thing. It has been agreed that the bloodstain is never to be touched again." That conversation, as much as anything, brought on a period of moody introspection that came to a head a few nights later. "Well," said Lady Eleanor one evening when she came by for our nightly chat, a habit we had gradually developed, "the great day has finally come." "What?" I sprang up excitedly. "You mean you have good news for me?" She gave me a shocked look. "Simon, are you still thinking about leaving?" "Of course." "But I thought, now that you're cock of the walk around here, you'd be only too happy to settle down again." "Settle down? That's it to a T, and that's what's wrong. At first I couldn't understand why, day by day, I began to feel more discontented than ever, but now I do. Don't you see? What future is there for me here now? To plod through my Saturday and odd Wednesday's commitment like a postman on his rounds, unmolested and unmolesting. To find myself a sort of family pet of these people, spoken of with affection like an old family retainer. What sort of existence is that likely to be, other than one of utter boredom? No, it won't do. It won't do, Ellie. I've got to get away, and you've got to help me." "I see." She looked dreadfully disappointed, but she did not try to argue with me. She simply said, "Well, nothing has come through as yet, but I'll keep trying." "I can't ask for more than that," I admitted. The tone of our conversation had become depressing, so I steered it back to her opening remark. "But tell me, what did you mean when you said the great day has finally come?" She cheered up a bit and smiled. "The young Duke of Cheshire has finally arrived to spend the last week of holidays here before he has to return to Eton." "Young Cecil? Well, well. From what I've heard of him, I'm sure I'll like the lad. He's got good stuff in him, including Canterville blood." "He has? I didn't know that." "Well, certainly you did. You've simply forgotten. Remember that first cousin of mine, the one we called Piggy?" "Oh, yes," said Lady Eleanor. "Her. Why, of course, I remember now. She married the 6th Duke of Cheshire, the one we called Blister." Her glance slyly teased me. "How nice. Here's a chance for the Cantervilles to become connected to the Otises." Heaven forfend. I'll admit that as a sort of Canterville Chase repertory company on Cousin Henry's night, they pleased me well enough. But that does not mean their old deficiencies are all forgiven and forgotten. Still in all, I confess I am rather fond of Miss Virginia. It would do my heart good to see her married. Anything to get her away from that family of hers. Married? Now? But Simon, she's only 15. Juliet was 14. Yes, and look how that marriage turned out. Besides, Cecil could not possibly marry until he is of age. Those guardians of his can see to that. However, there is nothing to prevent their becoming engaged. A 3-year engagement would be just right, and I'm sure that if the weather stays fair, so that they can ride through the park and stroll through the shrubbery a few times, Virginia will be showing off a solitaire within 24 hours. And the weather will stay fair, Lady Eleanor added with quiet authority. You women, there's nothing you like better than matchmaking. Maybe so, but in this case there is just enough spice in it to make it a challenge. I've already had a nice chat with Cecil's valet over a cup of tea, and he told me all about the row Cecil had with his guardians about him coming here at all. They did everything they could to stop him, especially his senior guardian, old Lord Grubb. Don't forget how they acted that first time, when he proposed on the spot. Packed him off to Eton, they did. I nodded. In tears, I believe you said. Seemed rather unmanly, but then we Englishmen spend most of our time trying to hide how sentimental we really are. Perhaps the boy was sensible in letting it all out, and perhaps he may also have been making a foolhardy attempt to impress his guardians as to how seriously he meant his proposal. Now you're getting closer to the mark, I think, and foolhardy it was, said Lady Eleanor. They were impressed, and as a result they've kept a close watch on him ever since. I nodded darkly. No doubt old Grubb has ambitious plans for him, and no intention of allowing him to become involved with the daughter of an American commoner, however exalted his temporary rank. Exactly. So, I'm sure the old schemer is at his wits' ends right now. But don't count him out. He's a sly old fox, is Lord Grubb. Love conquers all, even Grubb's, I said optimistically. The next afternoon, Lady Eleanor was back again, glowing with vicarious romance. Oh, Simon, you must come out. It's a joy to see those two romping together. Well a day. And just how much romping are they doing? Here now, we'll have no coarse talk about our young lady. She's a good girl. I'm merely talking about fine animal spirits. But Simon, it's a lovely day, so why don't you go out and sit in the graveyard for a while, and perhaps you'll have a chance to see them. It was true that ever since my triumphant comeback as Reckless Rupert, I had scarcely been out of doors. A breath of fresh air was in order. So I took her suggestion, and was presently seated in comfortable invisibility on a gravestone, enjoying the afternoon sunshine as it filtered through me. The tranquil scene was suddenly spoiled, however, by the intrusion of a small, wizened man wearing a bowler hat and a dreary black suit. Moving through the shrubbery in a sly and furtive manner, he abruptly sought concealment behind an ancient oak tree, not 15 paces from where I sat. His reason for taking cover was quickly apparent as the twins came padding along from the opposite direction like two young hounds on a scent. Pulling to a halt in front of me, Johnny looked this way and that, stared through me, and said, "Which way did they go?" "Search me," said Ronnie. The bowler hat peeped at them briefly, and I longed to cry, "One of them is right behind you," but that would have been unthinkable. Proper ghosts don't appear in broad daylight. It simply isn't done. But who was this trespasser, and how had the twins gotten onto his trail? Furthermore, Johnny's plural pronoun indicated that the man must have one or more confederates. When Johnny spoke again, however, I realized the lad was talking about our young lovers, and was unaware of the lurking intruder. "Well, if you ask me," said Johnny, "it's a rotten trick playing hide-and-seek and not letting us play too." "Ah, she's sweet on him, that's why." Johnny sighed heavily. "I know. Well, it had to happen sooner or later. Come on, let's keep looking for them." "Which way?" "This way," said Johnny, and they took up the chase in what turned out to be the wrong direction, because a moment later who should come racing along from a different quarter, flushed and merry, but Miss Virginia. The bowler head again peeped briefly. Running with the light-footed grace of Diana herself, Virginia sped past the graveyard and disappeared into a nearby copse. Another moment, and here came Cecil, moving less quickly as he peered this way and that. His eye was soon eyeing the copse in a speculative manner, but before he could set off in that direction, the small man in the bowler appeared in plain view and stepped into his path. Cecil started violently and drew back as from some venomous little adder. "Mudge, what are you doing here?" The small man removed his hat with greasy obsequiousness. "Good afternoon, my lord. His lordship sent me down with a communication of particular importance to you, sir," he said, and produced from an inner pocket a large legal document. "If you will be so good as to run your eye over it, the pertinent passages are marked. Perhaps I shall be able to carry back to his lordship your acknowledgement that the matter is thoroughly understood." Though he continued to regard Mudge with cold abhorrence, Cecil had turned pale. He was far too young to hide the flustered concern that had possessed him. With anxious eyes he perused the document, and as he did so grew even paler. Mudge concealed, from Cecil, though not from me, a nasty little smirk behind the rim of his bowler. "Well, my lord?" With an oath that must have been learned during off hours at Eton, Cecil dashed the document to the ground. "Damn you, Mudge, and damn him as well," he cried, with a fine show of spirit, but looking beaten all the same. This time Mudge hid his smirk with a low bow. "Very good, my lord. I shall pass your message along, and now I bid you a very good day." Mudge lifted his bowler once again, replaced it on his head, and was gone, sliding away like a small serpent, whilst the young Duke of Cheshire stood slumped in despair, glaring down bitterly at the papers on the ground. I expected more floods of tears, indeed. I hoped he would rush away weeping, because I was itching to get my hands on that document and learn what horrid consequence had overtaken the poor lad. But instead, his features hardened and set in a manly cast, and he retrieved the offending papers, hiding them carefully away inside his handsomely tailored linen jacket. Then bracing himself, squaring his shoulders like a true Briton, he turned and took up the scent, the delicious scent of Miss Virginia. Gone, however, were the eager steps and sparkling glance, and gone the smile from his lips. "I wonder what the little toad handed him." "A shock for sure," said Lady Eleanor. That evening I had hardly been able to wait till she turned up, and barely let her sit down in the second-best chair before pouring out my tale of Cecil's woe. She found my story doubly interesting, since it explained something that had been troubling her ever since the young lovers had returned to the house from their afternoon romp. "I was that worried when I saw them," she declared, resorting to an Umniism. "You never saw a more woebegone pair in your life. Formal, silent, walking about 6 feet apart, biting their lips, avoiding each other's eyes. I thought they had merely had some silly quarrel, but now I see it's more than that." "Of course it is. The young Duke has some dreadful secret. He has become distant and reserved. Virginia is upset and baffled and dying of curiosity, and so am I. Ellie, we must have a look at that document. Old Grubb is behind it, of course. I'm sure of that, but what is it he's come up with?" "Well, there's only one way to find out, Simon, and right now is an ideal time to do so. The young people cast such a pall over everything, Wash isn't looking too well either, that everyone went to bed early except for Cecil, and he's put on a dismal hat and a gloomy Inverness cape and gone to stride across the moors." "The moors? We don't have any moors around here." "Oh, don't worry. His frame of mind will make our meadows as bleak as moors. So nip over and have a look in the royal bedchamber." "Is that where he's been installed?" "La-di-da. Well, of course, rank has its privileges." "Why don't you go have a look, Ellie?" "Me? Why, it would be worth my place if Mrs. Umney was ever caught snooping around in a guest bedroom at this time of night. Anyways, why do you hesitate, Simon? It's a job that's right up your alley." "Listen, I still don't trust those twins. Are you sure it's safe?" "Of course it's safe. Go find the document and have a look at it. I'll wait here till you return." Traveling through back corridors, I made my way to the royal bedchamber. The house was indeed quiet. A low drone from the master bedroom indicated that the minister was peacefully sawing wood. I thought I heard the sound of muffled weeping coming from behind Miss Virginia's door, but I couldn't be sure. Not a sound was to be heard from the royal bedchamber. When I got up my nerve to try the door and enter, I found the room to be as Lady Eleanor had predicted, unoccupied. My search did not take long. I simply cast my mind back to the days when I was a young nitwit of Cecil's age, and asked myself where I would have secreted important papers. Then I moved the chair over in front of the great armorial wardrobe, climbed up for a look on top of it, and there was the document. It was the work of a moment to light the bedside candle, sit down in the chair, and find the passages which Mudge had said were marked. "Why, the old something or other," I muttered almost admiringly. "Whatever made him think of that?" At that moment I heard a sound that made my spectral heart skip a beat, stealthy footsteps coming along the corridor. Sliding the chair back in place, pinching the candle wick hard with wet fingers to put it out and stop it from smoking, and slipping inside the wardrobe, all that took precious seconds. But I made it just before the door of the bedchamber opened. The wardrobe door had been slightly ajar, so I left it that way as I burrowed in behind the young Duke's extensive wardrobe. You may wonder why, upon hearing sounds outside, I did not simply vanish. You are forgetting that I was still holding the document in my hand. I could hardly take it with me, nor could I very well leave it in the wardrobe. Only after I was inside did I start kicking myself. Not quite literally, to be sure, for I was being very quiet in there. Why had I not thought to toss the document back up on top of the wardrobe? But no, that wouldn't have done anyway. It would have landed in complete disarray. Cecil would have known at once that someone had touched it, and I didn't want that. But now what? I could hear the swish of a heavy garment being taken off and thrown aside, and the scratch of a match as light flared in the room. It diminished, however, and died, and a young male voice muttered peevishly, "This cursed dampness. Even the candle won't light." He tried it again, and this time it caught feebly. Meanwhile, I was suffering in the wardrobe. What if he decided to have another look at the document and make sure it was where he had hidden it? Wasn't that the first thing a normal young idiot would do in such circumstances? The scrape of chair legs on the floor bore me out. Peeping through a space between a morning coat and a Prince Albert, I could see enough through the slit in the door to know he was stepping up onto a chair. So it was now or never. Just as he was saying, "Good God, where?" I slipped the document through a crack in the door and let it fall to the floor. My little ruse worked. Groping about the top in the dim light, he could see none too well what he was doing, and he was completely taken in when he heard something hit the floor, besides which he was so relieved that nothing else mattered. He hopped down, picked up the document, and started breathing again. Must have brushed it off with my elbow," he muttered to himself. "Blast me if I'll put it up there again. Let me see. Somewhere inside the wardrobe, perhaps." I did not wait for him to open the door. By the time he did so, I had vanished.